Alright guys, it's time to broaden our understanding of chess and learn about one of the greatest openings of all time. It is of course the Queen's Gambit decline, steeped in history, played by elite players past and present. And so sometimes people say, well, if you're outside of the elite level of chess, what's the point of studying all this stuff? Games are decided by basic blunders. To which I have no real response. I don't want to get all defensive. Just say one can go to the art gallery and enjoy the paintings. And so I'm calling this video Theory versus Reality. And so yeah, we'll look at some of the theoretical moves played by top players. We won't go into any great depth. What I'm interested in is the reality, quote unquote, where we are going to look inside the Lichess database and get a feel for what you and I are likely to experience if we play this opening. And so the Lichess database is a database of hundreds of millions of online games. I've kept bullet games out of the filters. A lot of pre-moving goes on, so it's not particularly insightful. And we are going to have a look at some of the most popular moves and see where this game goes. And so before we get into it, one thing I noticed immediately is just how stable this opening is. And there is a temptation from newer players. I did this when I started playing chess a few years ago, to come up with some elaborate idea in the opening about what it is you want to do. So for example, I now made my bed and playing things like b6 against everything, which yeah, gives some great attacking chances, but also at other times feels like a grenade that's going to blow in my face. And so you're often down to only moves to keep yourself in the game. If title players are arguing over specific moves in the Queen's Gambit decline, that's usually a good thing for non-elite players like you and I, because it means that black has incredible resources to deal with the position. First thing to understand about the Queen's Gambit decline is that we can get into the position in many different ways. Typically it would be d4, d5, c4. The Queen's Gambit is on the board, not really a gambit. If you decide to accept an entirely different opening, very open, very tactical, then white with accurate play is going to get its pawn back. e6, very solid and stable, is declined. And so just notice that after say something like d4, e6, where you offer your opponent the opportunity to play something like the French, if they decline and play c4, we can just transpose into the Queen's Gambit decline with d5. Many games against English players can also transpose, where they play c4, knight c3, but after e6, d5, d4, you're getting into QGD positions. And so many ways to get here. We noticed immediately that there is an issue around the development of this light squared bishop. However, in juxtaposition to say things like the French, where your opponent has played e4 and typically e5 as well, you'll notice that it's actually far easier with accurate play to get the light square bishop involved in QGD positions. And so in this position, over 1 in 2 games go with knight to c3. And you can play knight f6. Top players do that, a classical way to play. You'll find many games in the Masters database like that. But just understand, from a non-elite level player's perspective, it can get tricky and uncomfortable. And let me give you an illustration. If you play knight f6 after bishop g5, bishop e7, unpinning the knight, your opponent has this annoying variation where they can transpose into some kind of exchange variation after c, d, e, g, where it looks like your light square bishop is liberated, but it's not. Because after e3, you can't just play moves like bishop f5, because after say takes, queen b3, you have here a double attack on the d5 pawn, b7 pawn. Very annoying. Alternatively, if you after e3, excuse me, we're going to play bishop g4, I guess you just bat it away with f3. The bishop's got to move again. Unless you go all the way back, you're going to run into a similar issue. After takes, queen b3, again, similar attacks here on the d5 and b7 pawn. And so let's say you try to shore things up by playing this move c6. Well, then your opponent has bishop d3, declining you the chance of playing bishop f5. And so you see, for this reason, if you go and look at Queen's Gambit decline videos on YouTube or on Chessable, many grandmasters or many title players will recommend the move bishop to e7, which is what we'll go over. Okay, so one thing to love about this bishop to e7 move is that if I now go into the Lichess database here and have a look here at this position, you can see that it's only been reached 400,000 times. We go back one move before bishop to e7 is played, you can see the position was 27 million. And so only 1% of people in this position went with bishop e7, which suggests if you elect for this move order, your opponent will have no idea what to do, because white is hardly ever facing it. and yet it is a line played at the highest level, probably far more intuitive even for non-elite players. And so the point here is that you're obviously declining your opponent the opportunities to play bishop g5, and all the previous stuff that I showed you after c, d, e, d, queen b3, making it very difficult for your light square bishop to develop, doesn't work. So let me give you an example. Second most popular move in the Lichess database in this position is going to be c takes d5, e takes d5, bishop f4. Okay, if your opponent does things like e3, then that's less critical. Their piece is not active. Bishop f4 is more critical. The bishop is now obviously active. And in this position, we can play c6, shoring up the d5 pawn. And now if they go with e3, yeah, you can play bishop f5. Okay, so the problem with playing bishop f5 in this position, which is highlighted by some grandmasters, is this move g4. And this is an entirely different line, quite annoying. Just notice that when I look inside the Lichess database, okay, in this position, it does tell me that some 40% of games go with g4. And so if you don't want this annoying line, instead what you can do is just go and trade off the dark squared bishop. So this is recommended in Grandmaster Alex Colovic's QGD course, which I think is the simplest for non-elite players to understand. There is an introductory video about it, which I linked to in the description below. And what he's saying here is that we're going to trade off the dark square bishop. And if your opponent tries to play moves like bishop d3, we're going to play knight to e7, bishop f5, and try to trade it all off, right? And so we have here bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, bishop d3, knight e7, preparing bishop f5. If your opponent tries to be annoying, plays queen c2, then g6 might be a move. When I looked at this, it does create these dark squared holes. You don't have a dark squared defender. This might be an issue down the line in the game. An alternative way this grandmaster talks about this position is to play b6, which I think somewhat weakens the c6 pawn. However, the point here is that we're going to play things like bishop a6 and trade off the light squared bishop. Okay, so in this bishop e7 line, c takes d5, e takes d5, followed by bishop f4 should just be normal chess. Kind of have the ideas to deal with that. Instead, your opponent can elect to keep the tension in the center. Most popular move in the Lichess database here is telling me is knight to f3. And so after knight to f3, we can go ahead with knight to f6, usual development here. Now the two main moves here are bishop g5, bishop f4. Okay, after bishop g5, there's no pin on the knight. We get this free move in h6. If we open up the Masters database, you can see here in this position, h6 played by half of players, castles, the other half. I like h6. The reason I think this is useful for non-elite players is because it just gives your king some breathing room when it's castled, and so you don't have to waste the tempo down the line playing a move like h6 in case you have back rank issues, possible mating attacks. Here, h6 isn't wasting a tempo because the bishop is under attack, so white has to spend some time moving this bishop again. Some people take, the vast majority of people are just going to go back. And just illustrating how stable positions like this are for people with the black pieces after castles, e3, getting ready to develop the bishop. Again, if we open up the Masters database here, this is now everyone, excuse me, not everyone playing, this is just the elite level games. You can see b6 is a move, knight e4 is a move, now b to d7 is a move. So you're in really good hands. The probability of you blundering here is quite low. There's all kinds of different move orders to consider. The move order I liked was from this Alex Colovic's course, chessable course. He has knight on b to d7 with the simple idea of playing c5. Okay, trying to put another pawn in the center, develop a piece, another piece. It looks like simple chess. We want to try and keep our life simple here. And so here, most popular move in the Lichess database, bishop to d3, and there's this classical idea of playing d takes c4, making your opponent move their piece again, and then striking in the center with c5. I've talked about it a lot on this channel. If you can play c5, play c5. Here you can do it. And this position is very, very solid for black. I mean, if your opponent decides to take, some people do that, you're just helping black to develop and get very active. So although that's a line, it looks pretty harmless. Also note, because your opponent played bishop g5, bishop h4, they don't really have control over the g5 square. This is one of the things that I saw in this position. Although it looks like white has all this attackers of the d5 square, They can't really play a move like d5 that just blunders a pawn. The bishop is obviously attacked 2 times. Black has to exchange off the dark square bishop to avoid blundering a piece, but then all that's happened in that sequence is black has gone up a pawn. So in this position, when you strike with c5, it's ultra solid, and it's just chess from here on in. On alternative, instead of bishop g5 is if your opponent plays bishop f4. So it's telling me here in the Lichess database, this is now the second most popular move. 1 in 3, 1 in 4 players do this. They play bishop f4. And here, obviously, h6 is just wasting time in the game. So we have castles, e3, and we can just immediately strike in the center with this move c5. Again, multiple moves here. Knight on b to d7 might be a move as well if you go into the Masters database. But here we can just strike with c5. And if your opponent decides to take, we happily take back. There is no bishop on g5 exerting pressure on the knight. And there's tons and tons and tons of stuff to study in this position. Okay, so you should be getting a real good feeling that you are in safe hands playing this opening. Ultra solid, you're just not going to blunder. And so if we switch on the Lichess database here, again, you see that we've covered off after bishop e7. Knight f3, c takes d5, got some broad ideas without going into any great level of depth. If we roll this back to when it was in this position, 1 in 2 players played knight to c3. Another 1 in 3, 1 in 4 players are going to play this move, knight to f3. And I notice might be a whole bunch of stuff to learn here, but if you just play bishop e7, the vast majority of players are going to play knight c3 anyway. The knight f6, we're offering a transposition back to the lines discussed above, making the amount of work we have to do less. And so here they can play bishop g5, bishop f4, which has already been discussed. Now, one final thing to think about here is that if you're at the higher end of chess, what you might find is that a lot of players are going for some kind of Catalan system where they are being kettering their light square bishop, and there's a whole bunch of theory around this to learn. However, if you're low rated, the chances of you facing that, and you can actually see proof of this in the Lichess database where people are playing g3, is quite low. So let's have a look here. g3, okay, only 6% of players doing that. And so there you go, ultra solid opening. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Thank you very much for your time.